Well, good afternoon and welcome, and what a perfect day. This is the best day we have had since last spring. So I think it's because of the people we're honoring. They brought us this fantastic weather. And we're here today because nothing is more critical at this moment in history than defending democracy, and all of us have to participate in it. January 6, 2021 was a tragic day that should never be forgotten. Wholly apart from politics, it should never be forgotten. It's a sobering lesson that even a strong democracy like ours can find itself under siege. No one knows that better than the special guests that we honor today. As a violent mob intent on overthrowing a free and fair election battered and assaulted its way into the U.S. Capitol that day, the final line of defense that prevented a disgraceful tragedy from becoming a successful coup d'etat were the brave men and women of law enforcement who join us today, as well as their colleagues. They paid a high price. Approximately 140 police officers were assaulted on January 6, 2021 at the Capitol, including about 80 U.S. Capitol Police and about 60 from the Metropolitan Police Department. Some officers have quietly resigned because of the after effects of the violence. And let us remember first and foremost that some officers lost their lives, and I'm delighted that we have family for those officers here today to accept their awards. The bravery and selflessness of the officers that day and their continuing efforts to speak out for justice and accountability have made them reluctant heroes, but they're heroes nonetheless. Had it not been for the actions of those dedicated officers and others like them who refused to yield to the unruly mob, we might be living in a very different country today. They are truly defenders of democracy in every sense, and they've given every American more than any award could possibly reflect. The January 6th insurrection must serve as a constant reminder to everyone that our democracy is not invincible. And these officers cannot be the only ones holding the line. Democracy requires more from each and every one of us. We cannot overlook, and we certainly must never concede to the forces that refuse to accept election defeat, or to the hundreds of elected officials and candidates around the country to this very day who falsely claim that the 2020 election was rigged. It's all made up. You all know that. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know it. It's all made up, and it's long past time for everybody to acknowledge that. The same threats that created January 6th are still with us today, as the big lie has continued to metastasize. Left untreated, cancer spreads. But democracy requires accountability. Without it, our experiment in Republican self-governance teeters on the brink of a crack-up. Today, the Center for Politics honors and recognizes all of the police officers, state troopers, National Guard, firefighters, and emergency responders who protected members of the U.S. Congress, their staff, journalists, and other public servants at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, as the legislative branch of America's democracy carried out the constitutionally prescribed certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. And one of those members of Congress who's been very active in supporting the families, Senator Tim Kaine, will be with us when he finishes another speech at the end of the lawn. He is going to have a few things to say. He was actually there and was sequestered in a room without his iPhone. That was punishment in and of itself, have your iPhone taken away. But he's got some things that he wants to say as well. Now, in just a moment, we're going to ask each of the officers who are with us today and the widows and partners of fallen officers to come up and receive the Defender of Democracy Award. But let me say just a brief word about the award itself. Each is sculpted in the shape of a shield symbolizing vigilance and service to others. The award features etched stars and stripes, along with 4 symbols representing core values central to state self-governance: freedom, justice, equality, and knowledge. Fashioned entirely of clear glass, the medium was selected to evoke democratic principles of truth and transparency, while its subtle reflective qualities are intended to invite viewers, all of us, the viewers, to find themselves believing in the values that the award represents. I want to thank former Center for Politics Advisory Board member Paul Hobby, as well as our foundation board for their leadership and assistance in establishing the award. Joining me for the presentation of these awards are 2 other exceptional representatives of the law enforcement community. Our very own Chief of Police at the University of Virginia, Timothy Longo. Please stand. And he also serves as Senior Associate Vice President for Safety and Security, and his Deputy Chief of the UVA Police Force, Brian Hall. Please stand, Brian. Now I'd like to ask Kara Ong Whaley, who's right there, to join us and read brief descriptions of the award recipients and then conduct our panel with the officers. Kara has worked very hard putting together this event, and really the whole staff at the Center for Politics has worked very hard to put this all together. So please give Kara a round of applause too.
Thank you all so much. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here today and to acknowledge the officers with us. We're going to introduce the awardees one by one, but I invite you to read their full bios in the program. And then after the presentation of the awards, we'll have a chance to talk on a panel. Chief Longo and Officer Bryant, if you're willing to come up, they're going to join Dr. Sabato in handing each awardee, and we're going to pause in between each one for photos as well. Sorry, there's an echo. Okay. First up, we have, Private First Class Harry A. Dunn, Officer Caroline Edwards, former Officer Michael Finone, Sergeant Aquilino Ganell, Private First Class Eugene Goodman, Officer Daniel Hodges, are receiving the Center for Politics' 2022 Defenders of Democracy Award for not only defending democracy on January 6, 2021, but also for their commitment to justice and accountability to prevent future violence and attacks on the electoral process. Despite the challenges of being in the public eye while continuing full-time duty, Officers Dunn, Edwards, Finone, Ganell, Goodman, and Hodges have all testified about the January 6, 2021 attacks in their personal capacity. They have not done so for personal gain. They even testified before Congress that they're not doing it for their personal gain, but to the contrary, they have been attacked and continue to be threatened for doing so. These officers who have put their own lives at risk for the sake of our democracy have called upon us to also say that we have a job in protecting democracy. Private First Class Harry A. Dunn, I invite you up. Private First Class Dunn has provided security for scores of major events at the Capitol, including presidential inaugurations, joint sessions of Congress, and State of the Union addresses. He has participated in the USCP's response to hundreds of protests and demonstrations where individuals gathered at the Capitol to peacefully protest. He has received several awards and commendations for his exemplary service at the U.S. Capitol Police, including a commendation for interdicting an individual in possession of a firearm who was attempting to enter the Capitol. Thank you. Michael Finone. Michael Finone served as a Metropolitan Police Department officer assigned to the 1st District for 20 years. On January 6, Finone answered a citywide emergency and rushed to the Capitol to fend off the rioters. He was dragged off the West Terrace, pummeled unconscious with fists and poles, and repeatedly stunned with a taser on his neck. He suffered a heart attack and a traumatic brain injury. He spent the following months warning about threats to democracy, and he has a new book coming out called Hold the Line: The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul. I encourage you to buy the book when it's published on October 11th. I also want to acknowledge that here with him today are his 3 beautiful daughters, Piper, Hensley, and May May. Capitol Police Sergeant Aquilino Ganel. Sergeant Ganel served in Iraq with the U.S. Army during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Even with the threat of bomb-filled roads, he volunteered to conduct supply missions for U.S. Can you read?
So he served in Iraq with the U.S. Army during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Even with the threat of bomb-filled roads, he volunteered to conduct supply missions for U.S. and allied forces and local Iraqi schools. On January 6, while on American soil, he said he was more afraid of the violence that took place at the Capitol than he ever felt serving in Iraq. On January 6, 2021, on the west side of the Capitol, he spent hours trying to stop the wave of assailants from entering the building. He was hit with an American flagpole and a bat, and at one point, he fell on the ground and he was dragged by the group and beat as they insulted him. I also want to acknowledge Sergeant Ganel's wife and son who are here with us today. Daniel Hodges. Daniel Hodges joined the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department in 2014. On January 6, 2021, Officer Hodges responded to the attacks on the U.S. Capitol as the Capitol Police units were overrun. While fighting in the tunnel, Officer Hodges was crushed by rioters in the West Terrace doors on the Capitol and beaten. He returned to full duty within a month and continues to serve as an officer. In testimony before Congress in July of 2021, Officer Hodges used the term terrorism repeatedly to describe what happened on January 6, 2021. He has called for accountability for the attacks and efforts to prevent the certification of the 2020 presidential election by Congress in order to thwart additional attacks. A bipartisan Senate report found that at least 7 people lost their lives in connection with the insurrection. One of those, sorry, go ahead. That will conclude it, sorry. Okay. So again, a bipartisan Senate report found that at least 7 people lost their lives in connection with the insurrection. One of those who died was Private First Class Brian D. Sicknick, who passed away after confronting 2 pro-Trump rioters and suffered 2 strokes. His partner, Sandra Garris, is with us today to accept the award on his behalf posthumously. The award will be displayed in the U.S. Capitol Police Building. Private First Class Brian D. Sicknick served with the United States Capitol Police from July 2008 until his passing in the line of duty on January 7, 2021, due to the injuries sustained during the attack of the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. PFC Sicknick spent the majority of his career with the department's first responder unit, where he served as a mountain bike officer as well as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit. Congratulations.
I apologize, I always get choked up getting to be alongside these folks. Less discussed are the at least 4 police officers who died by suicide in the months after they responded to the attack. The families of 2 of them are here with us today to accept the award posthumously on their behalf. Private First Class Howard Liebengood was Howard Liebengood. Private First Class Liebengood died by suicide on January 9th, 2021. And his death was a direct result of the trauma and strain from the events of January 6th and the unremitting schedule on the ensuing days. Dr. Serena Liebengood is with us. She is the widow of Private First Class Howie Liebengood, accepting the award. We also would like to acknowledge Howie's family with us today. His brother, John Liebengood, who is a graduate of the University of Virginia, and his wife, London, as well as Howie's sister, Ann Winters. Thank you so much for being with us. Officer Jeffrey Smith. Aaron, please. His partner, Aaron Smith, is with us today. Officer Smith was a 12-year veteran for the 2nd District of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. He always felt a calling to be a public servant, and that became a reality when he joined the MPD in 2008. Also here, I want to acknowledge with us today with Aaron is David Weber. He leads the forensics. Yes, let's give him a round of applause. David leads the forensics program at Salisbury University, and they used a number of forensic skills to find Officer Smith in the YouTube video to figure out what happened to him that day. And I believe it was the first ever ruling so that he could receive an in the line of duty acknowledgement. So thank you so much. And thank you, Aaron, for being with us. We're also giving the award to 2 officers who could not join us today, but their colleagues will accept their award on their behalf. Officer Caroline Edwards and Private First Class Eugene Goodman. Can you all please join us in thanking these brave men and women who are true defenders of democracy?
Now Kara is going to ask a few questions of the officers and the officers' family who are here, and I hope this will be enlightening to you. And following this, of course, as I mentioned, Senator Tim Kaine will be coming by to say a few words.
Sergeant Gannell is going to give a few words himself first.
Good afternoon. I just have my 2 cents on this special event. I would like to begin to thank you all for recognizing us. It's not hard standing up to the truth. It is hard staying quiet. But let me get on with this. I began my public serving 2 days before my 21st birthday on July 22nd, 99. I was awakened by my drill sergeant's loud noises as they banged metal trash cans with a metal rod, screaming, "Wake up, wake up, everybody, toe the line in front of your beds." I never been yelled so much for other people not doing what they were supposed to. It turns out the fire guard soldier, the person watching, staying awake, was not awake. What if I was the enemy? The drill sergeant asked. Who was supposed to be on guard duty? No one stepped up. Everyone waited and waited as the sergeant yelled and screamed some more. They had the name of the roster and knew who had the fire guard duty that night. Since no one stepped up, I stepped forward and said it was me. I didn't get in trouble, but everybody else did. Everyone else did. Push-ups, sit-ups, and other exercises for 2 hours. We learned the hard way that policing each other and hold each other accountable for and work as a team with one goal. It was that moment that I began to expect others to do the right thing. Most people tend to do the right thing instantly to prevent an injustice. In the military, I learned the Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. These words are interconnected, and as imperfect as I am, I have tried to live by these 7 words since I learned them. On January 6, 2021, these values were challenged to me again. People who sworn to bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the U.S. Constitution forgot that oath and breached the Capitol. Citizens didn't fulfill their obligations and embraced the temptation to take shortcuts that undermine the integrity of our democratic process. Fellow citizens didn't treat the police officers with dignity and respect. Instead, we were met with violence and beaten with the American flag as we put our bodies in harm's way, defending the Capitol, our nation, our democracy. Despite being overwhelmed, we did our duties loyally without thoughts of recognition or gain. Armed with the habits of being honorable and made sacrifices, we solidify our integrity. Doing what's right legally, morally, and even if it is not convenient or pleasant to you or to us. As the mob continued the siege, I knew I had to face my fear, the danger, or the adversity, enduring physical duress, at times risking our personal safety, as I was attacked by multiple riders, one way or the other, sometimes attacked simultaneously. Most injury has healed. The most challenging recovery has been the recovery of the moral injury. I expected the country to come together and see how dangerously close we came to lose our democracy, as our elected leaders were hunted down room by room and chased down as they ran to safety with the borrowed time that we gave them. As a result On January 6th, we lost several officers, and many were in Maine. Today, we have leaders fighting for the release of the very same people who hunted them down, the same people who attacked the police officer who defended the Capitol, as if we, the police officer, were the bad guy that day. I'm 100% certain that it was the police officer who were on duty defending the Capitol and not the other way around. I waited and then waited to see who would step up to do the right thing. Seeing the lack of personal courage, both physical and moral, I decided to stand up, acting up on the things that I knew were honorable. All I seek is accountability. It was brutal. It could have been worse. Our sacrifice should mean something. If I had to do it again, I would do it again. But that does not mean that I would like to do it again. To conclude, I'm grateful to my wife, my son, and everybody else who has supported me, us, the police officer, and those who continue to speak about the tragedy that happened that day. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sergeant Ganell. I want to ask all of our panelists, Sergeant Ganell has raised such an important point about the members of Congress being chased down. And we were talking earlier, just before this event, about the ways in which, depending on where you were stationed that day, you would have a different perspective of what happened. I would love if each of you might be willing to share your perspectives briefly about that day and what you think needs attention that has not received attention. Harry, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting us here and deeming us worthy of this award. First of all, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. To your point, what has gone unnoticed or untalked about? I thought about that question, and I can't come up with an answer about what has not been talked about. Everything has been talked about. The thing is that it's not been acknowledged. Everybody knows how bad it was. Even the people that are denying it, they know how bad it was. As you saw in some of the videos, the people that were denying it were caught on video running away from it. Were caught cowering inside the chamber. Were some of the same individuals that said that it wasn't that bad or that it amounted to just a tour that day. So I don't think that anything else needs to be talked about, acknowledged, because it's all there. But it's just the fact that people are denying about what actually happened that day for political gain, for votes, for fundraising, whatever it is. They're not being honest with themselves. And one of the challenges that I struggled with early on in this speaking out, seeking accountability and justice thing, one of the things that I struggled with is the people that are and were whitewashing everything that's happened. One of the ways that I deal with that is write them off as just willfully ignorant. There is no way that you can justify what happened, and there's no way that you can spin it any other way. And if you do, you are a liar, and you're willfully ignorant about what happened that day. This attack was, everybody watched it on television. Like, it wasn't some made up thing in our minds where there's only 2 or 3 people that saw what happened or secondhand witnesses. The entire world watched what happened that day, and they watched in horror because nobody knew how it was going to end, including my colleagues up here with us. So I don't think there's anything that necessarily needs to be addressed even more. We just call these people out as what they are, as just liars and election deniers and January 6th deniers. And I don't give those people a minute of my time anymore because you're plainly, willfully ignorant about what happened, and that's a choice that you're making. So I'm not going back and forth with you, and I will continue to seek accountability and justice for what happened that day.
Danny?
Hi. Thanks everybody for coming. What has not been discussed enough about January 6, 2021? Thankfully, people have been taking it seriously, whether it's taking it seriously to whitewash what happened, to underplay their actions, their support of the terrorists, or to examine what led up to the day, or to condemn those who took part in the attack, who supported it, who provided assistance to those who carried it out. Because of how much attention it's gotten, I feel like most aspects of it have been pretty well covered. I know it's not a very satisfying answer, and it's people are going to continue discussing it for years to come because it was unprecedented, and it's significant. I think if I had to pick something that is underrepresented, is talking about how to stop it from happening again. We've got, thankfully, the FBI has done a fantastic job of getting as many people as they can who were involved in the attack. They still make arrests today, all over the country. And we all know about the ongoing struggle of holding those in power accountable. Looking forward to the resolution of that. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, what's going to stop people from doing the same thing? What's going to stop people from just aggressive misinformation and propaganda campaigns to lead the ignorant, those who are so subsumed in identity politics, to lead them astray and foment another attack? That's something that needs to be addressed, and I don't have the answers right now, but if we don't, then history will repeat itself.
Officer Finone, what would you like people to know about your experience from that day?
Now, I've spent so much time talking about this crack. I feel like everything has been said multiple times over. But for me, I think, with regards to the day itself, I don't think we've taken enough time to acknowledge the fact that it was the American police officer that prevented this from happening, and think about what that actually means. That ultimately, I know that a lot of people in their minds, they see it as having been a incredibly organized response to the Capitol, but in reality, it was a lot of police officers that made the individual decision to respond that day, many of whom did so in spite of their leadership or in spite of their, departmental preparedness. It's for me, there's a lot of survivor's guilt in the fact that I keep getting acknowledged and carted out in front of groups like this who are deeply appreciative of the fact that, what I did that day, the injuries that I sustained, and the fact that, I'll come out on television and call people like Josh Hawley a bitch. But there's hundreds of other officers who experienced the similar combat to what I experienced. And, that has gone wholly unacknowledged. There was no award ceremony within the Metropolitan Police Department. There was no acknowledgement of the officers' sacrifices that day. And there was also a lot of emphasis placed on the injuries that we sustained as police officers, but I was a cop for 20 years, and I damn sure don't want to be portrayed as a victim of anything. I fought my ass off that day, and so did a lot of other police officers. And I think that it's a shame that we're unable to celebrate the violence that those officers were willing to engage in to defend ultimately what turned out to be our democracy and the transfer of power, albeit not peaceful. Building on that, I think for me, I've realized how fragile our democracy really is, how lazy we as Americans have become, taking things for granted like a peaceful transfer of power. Now we are suffering the consequences of that. One of the things that really caught me or struck me during the congressional hearings was the fact that we relied so heavily upon individual Americans, not institutions, but the individuals within those institutions to sustain our democracy. And that's goddamn terrifying. That really all of it came down to what really amounts to a handful of Americans who were dedicated to, our democratic republic, and that thought about things like honor and responsibility beyond themselves. And in contrast, how many people now participate in our American political system and hold leadership positions in America that don't even know the meaning of honor, who are, wouldn't know a selfless action if it slapped them in the face. And that's a scary thing for me. And it's a big motivator in what keeps me speaking out publicly.
All of you have mentioned the need for justice and accountability for January 6th and the attacks. I want to ask each of you, starting with Ms. Garza, what does justice and accountability look like to you?
Yeah, I've said this many times on television. Justice and accountability for me would be seeing Donald Trump in prison. But I don't think I'm going to see that anytime soon, any of us. What really makes me angry, especially recently, are some of the comments that he's made in reference to him being potentially indicted. Like some of the inflammatory comments he's made as far as if that happens, we're really going to see some bad things happen. And I think the reporter asked him, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, we're just going to see some really bad things happen. And I think, we really need to take a hard stance on him and, stop playing games here. And if need be, call in the military. I don't think anybody should have kid gloves with him. I think the time for that has passed. I think in order to stop this tyrant, we need to do any and all that we can and take a hard line with him. I think that's the only way we're going to stop him. I mean, he has gotten away with anything and everything, and there's been zero consequences for him. He's ruined lives, not just the lives up here, but even the people who supported him on the 6th. I mean, these people are going to prison for him. People have been murdered, and he's calling for more death and destruction. So it's devastating. It's devastating. So that would be justice and accountability for me, and all of the people who enabled him. They have to pay too, including Melania Trump.
Ms. Smith, what does justice and accountability look like to you?
Justice and accountability for me is obviously whoever was, at the end of the day, whoever they decide was responsible for the attack, they should be held accountable. But every person that was there that day and attacked every police officer should be held accountable and put in jail at the end of the day. There's still plenty of them out there walking around free, and the rest of us are sitting up here and suffering, and they're living their lives, and they need to be held accountable. Sure. One thing.
Aaron is too polite to say what needs to be said with regards to Jeffrey Smith. But we know who the assailants of Jeffrey Smith were. Aaron Smith has met with the Attorney General of the United States. She's met with the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. And yet one of those two people still hasn't been charged. And justice and accountability for the Smith family clearly would include charging the individuals who led solely and directly to the death of police officer Jeffrey Smith.
Yes.
Officer Dunn.
You know, from day one, I said that it was my mission to seek justice and accountability. And those words are just thrown around. You know, what is justice? What is accountability? Everybody asks, what does justice look like to you? What does accountability look like to you? And I don't really know. Like, obviously, yeah, throw them in jail. But when you have something like this MAGA culture or this Trumpisms, it's an ideology. You can't just throw an ideology in jail. It will continue to grow and thrive. So how do you get rid of that? I think that's a question that everybody in America is struggling with right now. One of the definitions that I found the best for accountability is an assurance that an individual or an organization will be evaluated on their performance or behavior related to something which they are responsible. And I think responsible is one of the key words in there, and also an assurance. Like Officer Hodges said earlier, how do we keep this from happening again? And I think that's one of the things that I want in accountability, whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen again. Some people have children, and some children you can look at your child a certain way, and they are scared out their damn mind, and they won't ever do it again. Some kids you gotta yell at. Some kids you might have to paddle, whatever. Some people are different, so there's not one, broad paintbrush that you can paint accountability with. Things are different, and I think it's up to those people that are in power in the Justice Department to determine that. Let's be real. Somebody being sentenced 10 days in jail to be served on the weekends, is that really going to deter somebody? I don't think so. But accountability to me is whatever it takes to assure that this will not happen again. Not just so somebody will feel bad or, lose a couple dollars or their jobs, to assure that this will not happen again. And I think that's where we're at in America. We're struggling. How do we get that? Throwing somebody in jail, then somebody's going to be a martyr for that person in jail now. Look at all the crazies that January 6th has exposed. People have become out supported. Like, you can't really kill an ideology, and I think that's what we're struggling with now. But the individuals who are directly involved, throw them all in jail.
Officer Finone.
The textbook answer, I would say, is adherence to the rule of law. If you broke it, then you need to suffer the consequences, devoid of any politics. At the end of the day, I'm a cop, and I know that punitive damages are the only way that that I know how to, prevent people from considering that type of behavior going forward. But I also, I think, just as important, or maybe even more important, is, taking this opportunity. And January 6th, in a lot of ways, I think, for me, was an opportunity that our country had to come to a moral reckoning, to reevaluate our lackadaisical approach to our own system of government, and also to start to address some of the issues that resulted in the events of January 6th. And I think a lot of them happen to be Danny talked about identity politics. I think there's a lot of, at least in my mind, that the people that are still continuing to hold on to this MAGA identity, it's motivated in racism, it's motivated in sexism, and just a general intolerance to people that are different, whatever their personal ideologies, and just an inability for Americans to relate with one another. I think that's unfortunately the only way for us to avoid a reoccurrence of January 6th.
Officer Hodges.
Justice and accountability. So like everybody else has said, we have a system of justice here, and it's imperfect, but it's what we have. And I want to see those who broke the law be held accountable to the law, serve time. I guess I'm more of a big picture person, but going off of what everybody else has said, it's not exactly justice, but I feel like the greatest justice would be in the future a complete repudiation of the ideology that allowed this to occur. Like how, unfortunately not always, but usually in polite company these days, if you see a Nazi symbol, people will think a little less highly of you. If you see a Make America Great Again hat in 50 years, I think that I'd like to see that raise some eyebrows and have some social repercussions, because that's one way that we stop this from happening again, is you don't tolerate the seeds when you see them. You have to, don't keep the peace for Thanksgiving dinner. Don't not say anything, because your relatives, you love them, but you're the ones who have the best chance of reaching them, and you gotta talk to them. You gotta make it clear that this is bad for them, this is bad for the country, and you have to actively shape the country to be a place where that ideology is repudiated. It's dangerous to conflate justice with revenge, but the phrase "the best revenge is a life well lived" comes to mind, and I think the best revenge for the country would be to go on and leave this completely in the rearview mirror, so that we can all look back and say, "God, that was awful. I'm glad that's never going to happen again."
You all have become strong advocates for mental health, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about those efforts, and especially what you're doing both within law enforcement and more broadly to destigmatize care and to promote mental health access. We'll start with you, Ms. Garza.
So I have I donated a large sum of money to the Capitol Police Memorial Fund in order to ensure that spouses or significant others of those who were left behind of fallen officers were going to be well taken care of. And also I made individual monetary contributions on my own to families of those left behind. And I also wrote an article last year in USA Today. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was really about my own mental health struggles after Brian passed away. I actually am still not back to how I was before Brian passed away. Some of you may know that, Brian and I were together for 11 years, and 6 months before he passed away, we decided to take a break in our relationship. So, that in and of itself was very hard. Can you imagine you end a long-term relationship and you're still on friendly terms with this person, you're seeing them regularly, talking to them, and then 6 months later they die? And then on top of that, they don't just pass away, but they die in the most public way possible. Their face is all over the news. It's a very politically charged death. It was very devastating. It was very difficult for me, and in addition to writing that article, I also continue to go on TV, not just to advocate for Brian, who I still love very much, but also to, let people know, the general public, but as well as his colleagues, his brothers and sisters in blue, that, seeking mental health treatment is not a negative thing. It's a good thing. I spoke out a lot about the officers that sadly, Aaron Smith's husband and Serena's husband, and then the 2 officers that committed suicide after their spouses did, Officer DeFreytag and Officer Hashida, about them and how devastating that was for their families. But just basically just speaking out that it's okay to get help and that there is help available. So that's a lot of what I've been doing. And then as a side note, something else I've been doing just to honor Brian's memory is Brian loved animals a lot, and I do too. So something else I do is I will donate monies to animal welfare organizations in his memory. So there was an article that came out not too long ago about a New York City carriage horse that had collapsed from heat exhaustion. And then the person who was operating that carriage was whipping that horse to get up. That poor horse was, just exhausted and couldn't go anymore. And people were filming and yelling at this guy, "What are you doing? This poor horse." So I donated a large sum to that organization who helps these New York City carriage horses called New York Class. So that's just another thing that I'm doing on the side to honor Brian. But obviously the mental health piece is very important as well.
Not too much feedback. Kind of what's become my passion since all of this mental health. To talk plainly and bluntly with everybody, I'm usually a little bit more, cautious when I drop my F-bombs than Mike is. But we can't tiptoe around mental health. It's too important. And I think it's just safe to say we're all fucked up in some kind of manner. Some of us more than others. Some of us hide it better than others. there isn't any new data or new anecdotes to say about mental health and how important it is. There's nothing new. Everything that's out, it's been said. More people just need to say it, and more people need to embrace it. Last 2 weeks, had a very, a PTSD episode that, it was weird. I was around a lot of people. They were friendly individuals. And I just got overwhelmed, and I got taken back to that day where I was just surrounded by people. And I needed to get out of where I was. Even though where I was surrounded by my friends. I was hanging out with people that didn't want to hurt me, people that loved me. But I was just overcome with this feeling, this emotional baggage. And I go to therapy regularly. I have a therapist. I embrace holistic wellness and stress management techniques. So one thing that you need to be aware of is that going to therapy doesn't make you immune to the trials and tribulations of life, and saying that I won't suffer any bad instances with my mental health. That's not true at all. What therapy does is it gives you the tools to be able to handle those flare-ups when they do happen, to acknowledge, hey, I'm not okay. I need to seek help. I need to talk about it with my friends. I need to isolate myself until I'm able to navigate life normally. People see police officers as these type A, strong all the time, always okay. We're human beings, and just like everybody else, and life is very hard for police officers and everybody else. But we need to embrace that, hey, we're not okay all the time. And it's okay to not be okay. It makes you normal. It makes you human. But it's very important to continue to seek out help when you're not okay. And there are times that I'm not okay. Just 2 weeks ago, like I said, just 2 weeks ago, I had an episode, and I thought I was fine. I thought I was past it. But, it snuck up on me. And fortunately, luckily, I have the tools to deal with that. Instead of flipping out on people that love me, that care about me, I was able to identify and deal with that when it happened. So I encourage any and everybody, even if you're okay, sometimes you just want somebody to vent to and to talk to without judgment. And, therapists are good at that. Mine doesn't judge me. So.
We really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing and all you're doing for mental health awareness, all of you. I'd like to invite Dr. Sabato back up. We have a very special guest now joining us that would also like to acknowledge you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think all of us enjoyed the panel and the comments from all of you about the day and the aftermath and the consequences that few people think about once an event is over. And I also think all of you should be honored again and again all across the country, and I hope you will be. We've got one other piece of the program. Before I introduce Senator Kaine, I did want to introduce, I don't know if Jim Ryan, our president, UVA president, is still here, but he was here, and there, Jim, do you have anything you'd like to say? Well, we appreciate your attending. We're delighted that Senator Tim Kaine is able to join us today. He's no stranger to the grounds or to the rotunda, but he's here because of this very special program. I think most of you know that the January 6th insurrection, as we've mentioned several times, interrupted the proceedings of the House and the Senate and forced members to evacuate to safe locations, including Senator Kaine. In fact, we were supposed to talk to you that evening. We were having a program right here supposedly talking about the results of the Georgia special elections and the incoming administration. Little did we know what was going to happen that evening. But Senator Kaine was indisposed at the time. But he's been very vocal in his support of the law enforcement officers who restored order that day and enabled the Congress eventually that night to proceed with the certification of the election results. Senator Kaine has also helped craft bipartisan legislation to honor the public service of police officers, firefighters, and emergency responders by supporting the families of public safety officers lost to trauma-linked suicides, including the families of officers Jeffrey Smith and Howard Liebengood. And they're, of course, here today. Senator Kaine, we're very honored that you could take the time to be with us, and we welcome you to come up now.
Well, I am extremely honored to be here. I want to thank Larry Sabato, who is a longtime friend. He has been just a pillar of this community, educational community, and the broader community. And his strong support of the center, and then helping the center realize that we needed to do this to reward defenders of democracy. It's a real tribute of your leadership. You know, you might have thought at some point in your past, because I probably would have, that if I was going to a Defenders of Democracy event, it would be to honor a Tibetan human rights activist or somebody who was involved in trying to protect freedom of expression in Hong Kong, because of course all Americans would defend democracy, and that wouldn't seem unusual. And yet what we've learned, and frankly for me, the learning began in August of 2017 here at Charlottesville. And I just was at Cabell Hall giving a talk about Charlottesville. Charlottesville and the attack on the Capitol are directly connected in so many ways, motivated by a fear of replacement of a statue, replacement of a president, amplified by disinformation and social media, an attack on democracy. You know, the Charlottesville City Council was popularly elected. They had voted to do something, but we wanted to attack that decision. 80 million people had voted for a president. We wanted to do something to attack that decision. So these were events that were very, very connected. And the fact that just in the coincidence of timing in a big university that you're having a seminar across the way about Charlottesville 2017 and honoring these democracy defenders shows that you're focused on issues that couldn't be more important. Now, to the folks who are here, you just have my utmost respect and appreciation. And I'm going to tell a couple of stories, one from January 6th and one from the aftermath of my interaction with these brave men and women who keep us safe every day. But I just want to begin to each of you. And I guess I would say particularly to Serena, because I didn't know all of you guys, but I did know Howie. Howie Liebengood is a child of the United States Senate. His father worked in the US Senate. So he grew up as a kid in the Capitol and then achieved a dream of being a Capitol police officer. This was more than a job for Howie. He was usually at the door in the Russell Building off Delaware, where we all come in every morning. And I would see him day in, day out during the first years that I'm in the Senate. It was more than a job. It was his family. And the institution meant something to him. I wish the institution meant half as much to some of my colleagues as it meant to Howie. And so, and I don't know the rest of you to be able to say personally what I would say about Howie, but you stand in his shoes. You're the same kind of people. Here's something we discovered in the aftermath of that day that was really awful, which is many law enforcement pensions award benefits for line of duty deaths, but exclude suicides. So it could be a violent altercation, it could be an automobile accident, it could be an illness that you get because of your exposure to a toxic substance. Nothing else is excluded. You have to demonstrate that the death is related to your duty. You have to show that. but only one thing was excluded. Under no circumstances in most of these pension programs could a death by suicide ever be labeled a line of duty death. What an injustice. What an injustice. That was not something I was aware of. But because of the Liebengood and the Smith families, I became aware of it. And working together with colleagues, we passed a piece of legislation to change that so that somebody who dies by suicide, their family has the same chance that every other family has to show that that is, in fact, a line of duty death. Painful, painful lessons. On the day of January 6th, as these folks were bravely fighting to protect us, I had come to the office early, had told all my staff, don't come in. I was just worried enough about what would happen that day. Told all my staff, don't come in. My chief of staff disobeyed my order. So I had one staffer in the office. We were sitting in our office in the Russell Building, and when the objection was raised to the Arizona votes, I went in the tunnels underneath the Capitol to go to the Senate chamber. I don't have a TV in my office. I wasn't watching what was happening. I was unaware of the crowd that was gathering. I made a mistake, which I never make. I didn't think it was a mistake at the time. I carried this with me everywhere, but I decided I don't want to be caught on TV like, scrolling for messages while we're doing something really important. And it was really important. Now, 4 years before, my name had been on all those letters that were opened as the Electoral College results were read. And it took 15 minutes because we weren't questioning the legitimacy of an election. But it was pretty clear that this day was going to be different. And I left this in my office. And so that meant when I was in the Senate chamber, I was not getting what all my other colleagues were getting, which was texts from family and friends saying, what the hell's going on? You should get out of there. They're breaching the Capitol. They're attacking the Capitol. I'm just kind of sitting there blithely, like listening to the speeches and okay. They escort the vice president out. I had seen this happen once before. I assumed the president might have been calling for one last, phone call to try to convince him to do what he wanted. I didn't think much about that. But then the sergeant at arms took the chamber and said, we're barricading you and the Capitol's under attack. The doors closed. There's ceremonial glass doors. There's heavy wooden security doors. They're very loud. For about an hour, we are there as these folks are trying to protect us and keep us safe and enable us to go to another location. At one point, my friend Senator Klobuchar, who sits near the door that's next to the hallway that runs to the House, said, I think I just heard gunshots. And we didn't know what was going on. We are escorted by these brave officers. They clear a path for us to go over to a committee room. Twice as we're making that very long walk, we were within view of the rioters there, once maybe 30 or 40 yards away and once about 10 yards away. And then we went into the committee room where we were barricaded for about 6 hours. The Senate staff said, we've outfitted this room so you can do the work here of completing the Electoral College count. But it was interesting. I was really proud of all 100 of my colleagues in this instance because no one even looked at each other or talked. We all said, no, we're not going to do it in a closed committee room. We're going to go back into the chamber as long as it takes. We're going to go back in the chamber and do it where all the American public can see us. Here is the first of the two stories I want to tell you, the story of that day, and then I'm going to tell you a story of something that happened a week later. We're in this room for about 7 hours, peak of COVID, 150 of us, all 100 senators, 50 staffers. A couple of very valiant Senate staffers remembered to grab the boxes of electoral votes and carry them with them. They're in wooden boxes. Had the rioters gotten into the chamber when those were there, the front pages of all the papers in the world would have been those ballots on fire out in the street. So these young Senate staffers had the presence of mind, hey, we got to grab this if we're going over there. They put up TV monitors, and now we're able to see on the monitors what's happening. And because I didn't have a phone, now I'm really realizing what's going on. It had been confusing and shocking, but I didn't really know what was going on. The Capitol was under attack. I had been told, okay, now I could see it. This is a law enforcement story that I'm going to tell you, and it's not Capitol Police, but it's law enforcement. I think you guys will appreciate it. About 4 or 5 hours in, battle's still raging. CNN shows a picture of 25 Virginia State Police cruisers pulling up to the Capitol. who came over.
That came over. They were the first ones there.
First ones there, Chincoteague pride, and I got a lot of Chincoteague pride. But here was the reaction in the room: 100 senators, 50 staffers, CNN showing Virginia State Police cruisers arriving. All of our colleagues who were kind of punchy at this time started to applaud. It's like the cavalry showing up in a movie, you know? Yay, good job. Hey, Mark and Tim, thanks for Virginia for being on the scene. Call the governor and thank him for dispatching the Virginia State Police. I went over to Mark Warner and I said, the last time there was a domestic insurrection against the government of the United States, Virginia was leading it. Virginia was leading it. Now we're in a domestic insurrection that's being led by the commander-in-chief of the United States, and Virginia is coming to the rescue of the Union. You tell me history can't change. You tell me things can't change. Things can't get different. That Virginia was coming to be part of the rescue crew for the Union on a day when the President of the United States was trying to encourage people to topple or at least delay it. Very powerful. I can tell you that story. I can't really describe what the story means because I haven't completely figured it out. But it made me proud. Even in a really painful day, it made me proud of the arc of at least where Virginia has come. And we still got such a long way to go, but it made me proud of the arc of how Virginia has come. The second story doesn't make me proud, and it's one that makes me sad, and I didn't have a good answer for the question that a Capitol police officer posed to me. It was about, a couple weeks after the attack, and some of you guys remember Jose Andres had been on the Capitol, and he and his crew were serving meals to Capitol Police, but also we had a lot of guardsmen and women from all over the country, and so there was kind of a really good operation going to provide meals. And I went down to thank some of the volunteers, and one of your Capitol Police colleagues said to me, "Hey, Senator, I'm your constituent. I live in Loudoun. Can I talk to you as a constituent, not as a Capitol Police officer?" I said, "Fire away. I want to hear what you have to say." And here's the question he asked, and I didn't and I don't have a good answer for it. He said, after the attack on the Capitol on 9/11, we saw all of you, we, the family that works here, Capitol Police, grounds crew, all this committee staff, it's a town. It's a town of about 40 or 50,000 people. We saw all of you, senators and members of Congress, after the 9/11 attack, standing together on the steps of the Capitol, linking arms, singing "God Bless America," devoted to being unified regardless of party or region. He said, so now here's what we've seen. Beginning in March of 2020, we've seen a pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. And we've seen you guys fighting about it, fighting about the science, fighting about the vaccines, fighting about who was at fault, fighting about what to call it. And now we've seen an attack on the Capitol, and we've seen you fighting about that. Was it a minor civil protest? Was it insurrection? Will there be accountability for those who planned it or not? And the question that he asked me is, when are we going to see Congress standing together in a united way when the nation is at risk, like we saw after 9/11? I didn't have a good answer for him. I don't have a good answer for him. You know, I can do what I can do in my corner of the world, and the legislation I talked about, other things, I try to. But he wasn't asking about me. He was asking about us. I didn't have a good answer for him. Larry, thank you to you and the Center for honoring these great public servants.
Senator, we appreciate so much your time and coming here and telling us the story. That I've learned things that I didn't know. You'd held a lot on me, Senator. You had held out on me. I'm kidding. We talk from time to time about these things. This essentially is the end of the program, but of course, it's not the end of the controversy that we focused on today. It isn't the end of the suffering by so many of the police and their families, law enforcement and their families. So this continues. And I hope that those of you who attended learned from these officers, these hero officers, and you will do on your own what all of us should do as citizens, and that is to make sure there is justice and accountability, and those who are responsible are held responsible for what they did. And much more important, think carefully when we're electing people so that we never again put into power people who will do what was done on January 6th and before it and after it. So that's the lesson, whether people choose to learn it or not. It's a story of democracy, up and down and up and down, and I hope we're going to start moving up again. We'd better. We really appreciate all of you coming. I'd like to ask you to join me in one more round of applause for these terrific law enforcement officers and families. And we are adjourned to enjoy this fantastic day. It's only in the 60s. It's fantastic. Thank you all for coming.